They thought they had cornered a lonely widow sitting on a pile of cash. What none of them understood, not my daughter with her rehearsed tears, not my son with his fists, not the man my daughter married, was that in less than an hour they would learn I had already moved every dollar beyond their reach, and the truth I had been hiding would shame them for the rest of their lives. My name is Angela Whitcomb. I am 66 years old, and for most of that time I have been a woman who worked with her hands. I sew. I have taken in other people's torn hems and split seams and wedding dresses that needed letting out at the last minute for as long as I can remember. And on the nights when the sewing did not pay enough, I sat up in strangers' bedrooms watching over the sick and the dying so their families could sleep. I know what a body sounds like when it is afraid, and I know what a house sounds like at 3 a.m. when you are the only one awake in it. Those two things turned out to matter more than I ever expected. I live in a small house at the edge of a lake at the end of a gravel road that turns to mud every spring. It is nothing grand. There is a screened porch where I drink my coffee, a sewing table pushed up against the front window so I can catch the morning light, and a rescue dog named Biscuit, who is mostly ears and appetite. My mornings had a shape to them that had not changed in years. Black coffee, no sugar. Toast with butter. Biscuit fed and let out. Then I would sit at my table with a garment across my knees and thread between my fingers and watch the light move across the water. It was a quiet life. It was mine. And after everything that has happened, I have come to understand that a quiet life is not the same thing as a small one. People who meet me now do not know that I started with nothing, and I mean nothing. I was a foster child. I moved through 6 homes before I was 12, and I learned early that nobody was coming to save me, so I had better learn to save myself. When I aged out of the system at 18, I had one duffel bag, $41, and no idea in the world where to sleep that night. What I had, instead of a family, was a woman named Vivian Cross, a seamstress who ran an alterations shop 2 blocks from the group home. Vivian did not owe me a thing. She had never met a stranger she trusted less than a teenager with nowhere to go. But she took one look at me standing in her doorway, pretending I was not scared, and she said I could sweep her floors for cash until I figured something out. I never did figure something else out. I stayed. She taught me to sew a buttonhole that would outlast the shirt. She taught me that skilled hands are a kind of dignity that no one can take from you. She gave me a trade, and she gave me a reason to believe I was worth teaching. When she died, she left me her good shears and nothing else because she had nothing else, and I made myself a promise at her funeral that I have carried for almost 40 years. If I ever had the means, I would do for someone else what Vivian did for me. I never told a living soul about that promise. Some things you keep close because saying them out loud makes them fragile. I married Raymond Whitcomb when I was 25, and I lost him 7 years ago to the kind of heart attack that does not give you time to say goodbye. He was 59 when he went, and so was I, and the silence he left in the house was so heavy that for a while I slept on the porch just to be somewhere he had not been. Raymond came from a family that had owned a piece of lakefront land for 3 generations, a long, narrow lot with a collapsing boathouse and a stand of birch trees that turned gold every October. When his parents passed, that land came to the 2 of us together. We had put both our names on the deed, the way Raymond's father told us to, as joint owners with what the lawyer called the right of survivorship, which is a plain way of saying that when one of us died, the whole thing belonged to the other, free and clear, with no court and no argument. I did not think much about those words at the time. I would come to be very grateful for them. For 7 years after Raymond died, I held on to that land out of loyalty and out of grief, even though it drained me. The taxes came due every year, whether I had the money or not. The boathouse roof let in the rain. The brush grew up so thick you could not walk to the water anymore. My neighbors gently suggested I sell it, and every time I refused, because letting it go felt like letting go of the last thing Raymond's hands had touched. I paid those taxes with money I earned kneeling on other people's bathroom floors and sitting up through other people's worst nights. I never once asked my children to help, and they never once offered. I want to be fair about that. I was proud, and I did not ask. But there is a difference between a mother who does not ask and children who never think to wonder. Then this past March, a man in a pressed gray suit knocked on my door and changed everything. He worked for a development company that wanted to build a small cluster of lakeside apartments, and he wanted my land to do it. When he said the number they were prepared to pay, $385,000, I had to sit down on the porch step. I had never in my life heard a figure like that spoken in my direction. He said the location was ideal. The water access was rare, and they would pay in full without haggling if I could sign within a few weeks. He left his card on my sewing table and drove back down the gravel road, and I stood in my kitchen with my heart going like a rabbit's. I did not sleep for 3 nights. I walked the property in the dark, remembering Raymond teaching Curtis to fish off the rotten dock, remembering Denise catching fireflies in a jar the summer she turned 7 before the world got its hooks into either of them. But I also thought about Vivian and the promise, and how for almost 40 years it had been nothing but a wish because I had never had 2 dimes to rub together. Here, finally, was the means. On the 4th night, I dreamed Raymond was standing at the edge of the water, and he did not say anything. He just nodded at me the way he used to when he thought I already knew the right answer and was only waiting for permission. In the morning, I called the number on the card. I sold the land. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. Inside of 3 weeks, the money was in my account, a number so large it did not look real on the screen. And the very first thing I did before I told a single soul, before I even told Lorraine Pruitt next door, who has been closer to me than a sister for 20 years, was drive an hour into the city to see a lawyer named Paul Brenner. I want to be careful about how I tell this part because it matters more than it seemed to at the time. I did not go to Paul Brenner because I was frightened of anyone. In March, I was not frightened of anyone. I went to him because I had spent my whole life watching money change people, and I did not intend to let it change me, and I did not intend to leave a promise I had carried for 40 years to chance. I sat in his office for the better part of an afternoon, and I signed a number of documents, and I set up an appointment for a medical examination that he recommended for reasons I did not fully appreciate until much later. I will tell you what all of that was for when the time comes. For now, it is enough to say that by the end of that first week in April, before anyone in my family knew I had $1 to my name, I had already put nearly everything where no one could ever take it, and I had a folder in my sewing cabinet that would turn out to be worth more than the whole $385,000. For 2 weeks after that, my life looked exactly the same. Coffee toast biscuit, the light on the water a hem across my knees. The only difference was a small private smile that would find my face in the afternoons, because I knew what I had done and no one else did, and the not telling was its own kind of pleasure. I thought foolishly that I might get to keep the peace of it. That ended on a Thursday. I was at my sewing table letting out the waist on a church dress for a woman across town when I heard tires on the gravel. I knew the sound of that little white car before I saw it. Denise only ever came on Sundays, and not every Sunday, so a Thursday visit put a cold finger on the back of my neck before she had even parked. My daughter is 40 now. She used to stage houses for a real estate company arranging other people's furniture to make empty rooms look like somewhere you would want to live, until the company let her go and the business she and her husband started went under. She got out of the car in a yellow dress I had never seen and heels that sank into my soft yard with every step, and she came up the walk with a smile I recognized from when she was 9 years old and had broken something and was deciding how to tell me. "Mama, what a nice surprise to catch you home," she said and kissed my cheek. "I've been wanting to come see you." I made her a glass of ice water, and we sat in the front room, her on the couch, and me in the old wooden rocker that had belonged to my foster grandmother, the one piece of furniture I have ever owned that came with a story. Denise turned her water glass around and around in her hands, and would not look at me straight, and I felt the visit tip toward its real purpose, the way a boat tips when someone stands up in it. "Mama," she finally said. I ran into Marlene Dobbs at the pharmacy, and she told me the strangest thing. She said there were trucks and men in suits out at the lake property. She said you sold it. My heart picked up, but I kept my hands still in my lap. Marlene Dobbs cannot hold a secret in a bucket. Of course she had seen the surveyors. I was not going to lie to my own child. "I did, Denise," I said. "I sold it a few weeks ago." Her eyes changed. I have spent a lifetime reading faces, watching a patient's face for pain they would not admit to, and I saw the thing that moved behind my daughter's eyes, and it was not concern for me. It was arithmetic. "Oh, Mama, that's wonderful," she said, leaning forward. "That's really wonderful. And what did you get for it? It had to be a good amount. A lot of lake frontage like that." She did not ask whether it had been hard to sell her father's land. She did not ask whether I had cried, which I had. She asked the number. "It was a fair price," I said. "I'd rather not get into the particulars. Mama, you can tell me. I'm your daughter. I worry about you out here all by yourself with a sum like that just sitting in a bank. It isn't safe, honestly. I want to make sure you're being smart about it." She reached over and put her hand on my knee, and her voice went soft and confiding, and every word of it landed on me like a salesperson's pitch, not a daughter's love. Here's the thing. Todd and I have been going through a rough patch. The business didn't take off the way we planned, and we've had some expenses we didn't see coming, and I thought, well, maybe this is one of those times when family can lean on each other. There it was. She had not driven an hour on a workday because she missed me. She had come because she had found out there was money. Lean on each other, how, Denise? Just a little help. Not charity, Mama, I would never. A loan. 25, maybe 30,000, just to get us steady again, and we'd pay it back with interest the minute the business turns around. I promise you that. I sat with it for a moment, looking at my grown daughter's face, and I tried to keep my voice level. 25 or 30,000. She said it the way a person asks to borrow a cup of sugar, as if it were nothing, as if it did not represent years of my knees and my back and my sleepless nights. Denise, I said, that money is not for lending. I have plans for it. The softness went out of her face all at once, and what replaced it was an expression I knew from her childhood, the pinched, wronged look of a girl who has been told no and cannot believe the word applies to her. What plans, Mama? What are you going to do with that kind of money at your age? You're not going to buy a mansion or take a world cruise. It would make so much more sense to put it into something that actually grows something that helps the whole family instead of just sitting there. At my age, I repeated, and I felt those 3 words go into me like a needle. Because I am 66, I have no right to my own money. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you said. I set my sewing down. And I want to ask you something. When I was scrubbing other people's floors at 60 because I could not make the tax payment on that land, where was the whole family then? When I was sitting up all night with a dying stranger so I could pay the light bill, who in this family asked whether I had enough to eat. Her face went red. We didn't know you were struggling. You never said anything. If you had asked, we would have helped. You did not know, I said quietly, because you did not look. She had no answer for that, so she changed direction, which is a thing my daughter has always done when she is losing. She admitted a little at a time the way you pull a splinter what the money had actually gone to. A new car they could not afford. A kitchen they remodeled to impress people who did not care about them. Some investment of Todd's that evaporated. They had spent themselves into a hole chasing a life that looked good from the outside, and now they wanted me to fill the hole with the money I had earned selling the one thing Raymond left me. So you spent recklessly, I said, and now you would like me to pay for it. That is not fair, she snapped, and her patience was gone now I could hear it. You're being resentful. You can't punish us forever for things that happened years ago. I am not punishing anyone. I am protecting something that is mine. That money came from Daddy's land. That land was our inheritance too. And there it was, the word I would hear over and over in the weeks to come, thrown at me like it was a fact instead of a wish. Inheritance. I felt something old and hard settle into place in my chest. Your inheritance, I said. That property sat abandoned for 7 years while I bled money keeping it alive. You never paid a tax bill. You never patched the roof. You never pulled a weed. And now that I have turned it into something with my own decision and my own signature, suddenly it is yours. Inheritance is inheritance, Mama. It doesn't matter who paid the taxes. She was wrong about that, more wrong than she knew, but I did not tell her so. I was saving that. That was when I heard the second engine on the gravel. Through the front window, I watched a mud-spattered pickup pull in beside her little white car, and my stomach dropped because there is no such thing as a coincidence when your children arrive one after another on a Thursday. Denise had arranged this. She had brought reinforcements and timed them to arrive once she had softened me up, and the fact that my own daughter had war-gamed a visit to her mother told me more about where we stood than anything she had said out loud. Curtis came in without knocking the way he has done since he was a teenager, as though the house were still his to walk into. He is 37 now, my oldest, a big man gone soft in the middle with a patchy beard and the flushed, loose-eyed look of somebody who had already been drinking, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon. He does construction work when he can get it framing and roofing, mostly without a license, and mostly for cash, and he owes money at every bar and card game in the county. He dropped onto the couch beside his sister, and I caught the beer on his breath from across the room. Hey, Mama, he said with a smile that did not fit his eyes. Denise told me the good news. Of course she did, I said. And I lowered myself back into the rocker because my legs had begun to shake. Not with fear yet, but with a kind of furious grief. Look, Curtis said, spreading his big hands like a man being reasonable. We're family. We should talk about how to handle this the smart way, all of us together. There is nothing to handle, Curtis. The money is mine and I will decide what happens to it. Mama, be reasonable, Denise said. We're not asking for everything. Curtis has his own troubles. He's behind on things too. I looked at my son, this 37-year-old man who had never held a job past the 6-month mark in his life. What troubles, Curtis? He shifted his weight. Some back payments, a few debts, nothing you need the details of. The point is, family helps family. Family helps family, I said slowly, and I let the words sit in the air between us. That is an interesting thing to say now after 7 years in which I barely existed to either of you. When was the last time one of you drove out here without needing something from me? When did either of you pick up a phone just to ask how I was doing? They looked at each other. It was the same look they used to exchange as children when something was broken and they were choosing which lie to tell. But they were grown now, and grown people's lies have consequences, and that look frightened me in a way it never had when they were small. I could feel the whole afternoon tilting towards something I did not want. I stood up again because I could not stay still. I spent 7 years alone out here, I said, and my voice was climbing and I could not stop it. 7 years while the two of you spent money you did not have on cars and kitchens, and now that there is finally something in my account here, you both are on a Thursday afternoon with your hands out and the word inheritance in your mouths. Get out. Mama, Curtis started rising off the couch. Get out of my house, both of you, and do not come back until you can remember how to speak to me like I am your mother and not a bank. They went, but they did not go the way I expected. They did not slam out in a fury. They stood and they smoothed their clothes, and they traded one more of those looks between them, slow and cool, and it put a chill down my spine worse than any shouting would have. At the door, Curtis turned back to me, and his face had gone to something I had never seen on it before, a flat and calculating stillness. This isn't finished, Mama, he said low. You're going to think about it. We're not going to just stand by while you sit on money that ought to be all of ours. It is not all of yours, I said, and I tried to sound braver than I felt. Denise gave a small, sad laugh from the doorway, the kind you give a person you have decided is not well. You should think about seeing somebody, Mama, she said gently. Making a decision like this all alone at your age. It isn't like you. Maybe the money's too much for you to handle by yourself. Maybe you need some help managing it. Maybe somebody else should be making these decisions. Then they were gone and I heard both engines start, and I sat back down in Vivian's rocker and shook for a long time, not from cold. It was only after their taillights had disappeared down the gravel that I noticed the house was wrong. Small things, the kind you feel before you can name. The folder of papers I keep in the cabinet by my sewing table was not squared the way I always square it. The little dish where I drop my spare key by the door held 1 key instead of 2. And when I picked up my phone to call Lorraine with my hands still trembling, I found a voicemail I had not heard come in left an hour earlier from Denise's number. She had called me by accident, the way people do when a phone shifts in a purse, and it had recorded 11 seconds of her car before it cut off. In those 11 seconds, I heard my daughter's voice muffled and unaware, and then Todd's clear as a bell saying, "And you're sure the doctor you talked to will put in writing that she's not competent to manage it, because that's the whole thing, that's what makes it work." I sat there in the dark with the phone in my hand, and I understood all at once and all the way down that this had not been a desperate visit from struggling children. This was a plan. It had a shape and a strategy, and it reached beyond that room, and it was aimed at me, and it had been aimed at me before either of them ever knocked on my door. My daughter wanted my money, but my son-in-law wanted something worse. He wanted a piece of paper that said I had lost my mind so that a court would hand him the keys to everything I had, and my own children were going to help him do it. What none of them knew, sitting in their cars planning how to take a helpless old woman's fortune, was that the fortune was already gone where they could not follow, and the helpless old woman had signed the papers that would undo them 3 weeks before any of this began. I did not sleep that Thursday night. I sat up in Vivian's rocker with Biscuit's chin on my foot and the porch light burning, and every time the house settled or a branch scraped the roof, I was on my feet with my heart in my throat. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and did something I had never once done in 20 years of living alone at the end of that road. I checked every window latch, and I pushed a kitchen chair up under the knob of the back door, and I sat back down and waited for a dawn that felt like it would never come. A woman should not have to barricade herself against her own children. That is a sentence I never imagined writing, and it is the truest one in this whole account. The next morning Denise called, and her voice had changed completely. Gone was the pinched, wronged tone from the day before. In its place was something warm and worried, as if the ugliness in my front room had never happened. That frightened me more than the anger had. When Denise is angry, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. This new version sweet and managing was the daughter I did not know how to fight. "Mama, I hope you slept all right," she said. "I've been thinking about our talk, and I feel just terrible about how it went. We both said things. Why don't we start over, just you and me, somewhere nice? Let me take you to lunch. The Bluebird, that little place you like downtown. No pressure, no arguing, just a mother and her daughter." I should have said no, but there is a part of a mother that never fully gives up hoping even when hoping is foolish, and that part answered before the rest of me could stop it. I told her yes, and I told her plainly that my decision about the money was final, and she said, "Of course, Mama." Of course, she only wanted to smooth things over. We agreed on the following Tuesday at noon. The Bluebird is a busy little place with good home cooking and a lot of eyes, and I told myself a public room was a safe room. I dressed with care that Tuesday. I put on the soft rose-colored dress Raymond gave me for my 50th birthday, and I did my hair the way I like it, because I wanted to walk in looking like a woman who knew her own mind, not the confused old creature Denise had described in my own doorway. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a table by the window. Denise arrived exactly on time, and she did not come alone. Todd came with her. Todd Farrow is 43 thin with a thread of a mustache and shirts that always look a size too expensive for the man inside them. From the day my daughter brought him home, I have felt that something about him was rehearsed, that every warm thing he said was a line he had practiced in a mirror. He has a smile that stops at his cheeks and never reaches his eyes, and a way of talking to you that makes you feel like a signature he is trying to collect. "Angela," he said, kissing my cheek, and the cold of it went right through me. "It's so good to see you. I hope you don't mind me tagging along." Denise thought it might help to have somebody at the table who understands the financial side of things. "I do mind, actually," I said. This was meant to be between my daughter and me. "Mama," Denise said quickly, "Todd is family, and he knows so much about money and planning. I just thought he could help us find something that works for everybody." "There is nothing to find," I said. Todd leaned in with the patient expression of a man who believes he is the smartest person at any table. "Angela let me explain how these things usually work in a family with real resources. When there's a meaningful amount of money, the intelligent move is to structure it so it benefits every member of the family. Spread strategically, it does far more good than it does sitting idle in one person's account. Todd, with respect, my money is not your concern. But it is, though. I'm your daughter's husband. What touches Denise touches me, and what touches us touches your grandchildren. Bella and Sam." He said their names slowly, and I understood exactly what he was doing, reaching for the two people in this world I would do anything for, and holding them up like a card he had been saving. "My grandchildren are cared for," I said. "If they need something, their mother can come and talk to me about that specific thing. But I am not handing over a fortune, so the two of you can keep living a life you cannot afford." His face tightened, and he changed his approach the way a man changes his grip on a tool that is not working. "Let me be honest with you then, because I think you're not seeing how serious this is. We could lose the house. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Your grandchildren could lose the roof over their heads. Is that what you want on your conscience?" Denise put her hand over her mouth and produced a tear right on cue the way she used to in high school. "It's true, Mama. Bella asked me last week why she can't do her dance class anymore. I didn't know what to tell her. The performance of it turned my stomach." And then Todd made his mistake. He got tired of coaxing, and he showed me the edge of the thing. "I'll tell you something else you should think about," he said, dropping his voice so the next table would not hear. "A woman your age out at the end of a road by herself with a large amount of money that people in town already know about. That's a dangerous situation, Angela. There are men who look for exactly that. It would be a terrible thing if something happened to you out there all alone." I looked at my son-in-law across a plate of food I had not touched, and I understood that I was being threatened by the father of my grandchildren in a booth at the Bluebird Cafe. I set my napkin on the table and I stood. "I am not going to order anything," I said. "And I am not going to give either of you $1 no matter how you dress up the asking. Threats included." "We are not threatening you," Denise said loud enough that 2 tables turned to look. "We just want you to be reasonable. Being reasonable to you means giving you my money," I said. I am done being reasonable in that way. I walked out on legs that barely held me, and as the door swung shut behind me, I heard Todd say to my daughter low and even, "Don't worry, honey. There are other ways to handle this." Those 5 words followed me home. There are other ways to handle this. I drove the gravel road with my hands shaking on the wheel, and that night I did something I should have done a week earlier. I called the one person on this earth I trust without reservation, Lorraine Pruitt, who has lived next to me for 20 years and been widowed even longer than I have. I told her all of it, the sale that demands Todd's threat in the booth. Lorraine listened without interrupting, which is not her habit, and when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. "Angela," she said, "those aren't children throwing a tantrum anymore. That man just told you he'd have you robbed. You cannot sit out there alone waiting to see what he means by it. You need to protect yourself, and I mean starting now, not after something happens." She was right. And here is where I want you to understand something about me, because everyone who heard this story afterward assumed I spent those weeks hiding under my bed. I did not. I have been taking care of myself since I was 18 years old with $41 to my name, and I was not about to stop at 66. That threat in the cafe did not make me smaller. It woke something up. The very next morning I got to work. I had the locksmith come and change every lock in the house, and I did not hand a single new key to either of my children. I bought a doorbell camera and a second little camera for the back, and Lorraine's grandson mounted them for me and showed me how to watch on my phone. I bought a small recorder, the kind that fits in an apron pocket, and from that day forward I kept notes, dated and detailed, of every call and every visit, because a lifetime of watching over the sick had taught me that a careful written record is worth more than the best memory. I called Paul Brenner, the lawyer, and told him everything, and he told me to come in, and he told me one thing more that changed how I understood the whole affair. He told me to call the county's office for the protection of vulnerable adults and make a report so that if anything happened, there would already be a file. I did that too. And then Brenner reminded me of the appointment I had made back in the first week of April, the medical examination I had not fully understood the purpose of at the time. I had gone to see a specialist, a geriatric physician, and I had been evaluated thoroughly for my memory and my judgment and my capacity to manage my own affairs. That week, the written report came back signed and formal, stating in plain medical language that Angela Whitcomb was of entirely sound mind and fully competent to handle her own money and her own life. I had ordered that evaluation in early April for reasons I could not have named, than only a feeling a lifetime's instinct that money makes people say you are not yourself. Now holding that signed report in my kitchen, I understood I had built a shield 3 weeks before I knew there was a spear coming. I want to stop here and tell you plainly what I had already done with the money, because it is the hinge on which everything else turns, and because keeping it from you any longer would be a cheat. When I drove into the city that first week of April and sat in Paul Brenner's office for a whole afternoon, I was not simply making a will. I had come to keep the promise I made at Vivian Cross's grave almost 40 years before. With Brenner's help, I had taken the great majority of the money, the bulk of that $385,000, and placed it into a charitable trust that could never be undone. Not paused, not reversed, not reached by any court or any relative. It was already, by the time Denise ever heard the word from Marlene Dobbs at the pharmacy, no longer mine to give, and no longer anyone's to take. It belonged to a purpose. And with a smaller, separate portion, I had opened protected education savings accounts, the kind meant for a child's schooling, one for Bella and one for Sam, so that whatever became of their foolish parents, my grandchildren would have a way forward. The account with my name on it, the one Denise and Todd and Curtis were circling like dogs, held only what a careful woman keeps for her own old age. There was no fortune sitting there to be seized. There never had been, not for a single day that they were plotting to seize it. I did all of that before anyone knew I had a dime. Not to hide it from creditors, because I did not owe a soul on this earth a penny, and a woman who owes nothing may do as she pleases with what is hers. I did it because I had watched money turn people into strangers my whole life, and I did not intend to leave my promise or my grandchildren at the mercy of anyone's greed. When I understood that sitting in my kitchen with the doctor's report in one hand and the trust papers in the folder beside me, I nearly laughed and I nearly wept. They were building an elaborate machine to take something that was already gone. The break-in came this following week. I was at Lorraine's for supper, and my phone buzzed, and there on the little screen was a man at my back door working the handle, and then the door opening because he had a key, the spare key that had gone missing from the dish by my door the day Curtis and Denise came. He was inside for 11 minutes. The camera caught all of it. He went straight for my sewing cabinet and my bedroom, straight for where a person might keep papers, and he left with nothing because there was nothing to find. When I got home and walked through the house, I felt violated in a way I cannot fully describe my drawers. Disturbed, my papers shuffled the metal box from under my bed, pulled out and opened and left empty of anything worth the trouble. But underneath the fear there was something steadier, something almost like grim satisfaction, because I had it all on film, and I had built a house with nothing left in it to steal. 2 days after that, my cousin by marriage came to see me, and what he told me turned the whole picture in the light. Wayne Ackerley is a mechanic, a quiet, decent man in his 50s, Raymond's cousin, and he is not one to gossip or exaggerate. He stood on my porch, turning his cap in his hands, and would not quite meet my eye. "Cousin Angela," he said, "I've been chewing on whether to come tell you this, and I decided I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. I was down at Hank's the other night, and Curtis was there drunk running his mouth to a couple of fellas I did not like the look of. And they were making plans. Plans about you." My stomach went cold. "What kind of plans, Wayne?" "Ways to make you sign the money over, and your son-in-law's name came up more than once. Todd." Wayne turned the cap another half circle. "Angela, it wasn't Curtis running the show. From the way they talked, Curtis is just the muscle. This whole thing, the pressure the men, it's Todd pulling the strings because Todd's the one in real trouble. Those fellas at the bar, they weren't Curtis's friends. They were there about a debt. Todd's debt. Word is he's into a hard man for $260,000, the kind of loan you don't walk away from, and he's out of time, and he's decided your money is how he gets out of it." There it was, the true shape of the thing at last. This was never really about my children resenting me, or about an inheritance, or even about greed in the ordinary sense. It was about Todd Farrow drowning in a debt to a dangerous man, and reaching for the nearest thing that might save him, and finding it in his wife's mother. The strangers who had been seen near my property were not local troublemakers Curtis had scared up. They belonged to that debt. And my son-in-law had looked at the whole ruin of his own life, and decided the way out was to take a helpless old woman's fortune, and if she would not hand it over, to have her declared out of her mind, so a court would hand it over for her. Wayne told me one thing more, the worst thing, the thing that turned my fear to ice. One of them said Todd knows a doctor who'll write whatever they need. A paper saying you've got dementia, that you can't manage your own affairs. They figure if they've got that, they can get a judge to put Todd in charge of your money. I took that to Paul Brenner the next day, and I will tell you what he told me because it matters, and because the men plotting against me were too ignorant or too desperate to know it. He said their whole scheme was built on a fantasy. You do not simply buy a false diagnosis and walk into a courthouse and walk out with control of a woman's estate. To have a person declared incompetent to be made her guardian or the conservator of her money, a person has to file a petition in court, and the court orders its own independent medical examination by physicians the court chooses, and the woman herself is notified, and she has the right to her own lawyer, and there is a hearing where she can appear and object and be heard. It is slow, and it is public, and it is very hard to fake, and it was designed precisely to protect people like me from people like them. And here was the thing that made Brenner smile a thin lawyer's smile of a battle already won. I already held in my own hand a signed report from a respected physician stating I was completely competent, dated weeks before any petition they could dream up. If they walked into any courtroom in this state claiming Angela Whitcomb had lost her mind, I would walk in behind them with a doctor's letter and a folder full of dated recordings, and they would not merely fail, they would be exposed. I hung on to that knowledge like a railing on a dark stair, and it steadied me right up until the last Saturday in April, when the plan they could not make work, the smart way, finally came for me, the ugly way. I was coming back from the pharmacy that afternoon, a small bag of nerve medicine on the seat beside me, when I turned onto my road and saw Curtis's pickup already in my yard. And parked behind it, a gray sedan I did not know with 2 men sitting in it, who were plainly waiting for something. I knew the instant I saw them that these were the men from Hank's, the men who belonged to Todd's debt. I did not pull in. I stopped short, and I got out quietly behind the big maple at the corner of my property, and I took out my phone with my hands shaking, and I called Lorraine, and I dialed the emergency line, and I started my little recorder in my pocket, all of it, because I had learned by then to gather everything. Curtis was calling my name across the yard. "Mama, I know you're around here. Come on out. We're just going to talk." His voice did not belong to a man who wanted to talk. One of the men got out of the gray sedan tall, with tattooed arms and a flat, mean face, and then the second shorter and heavier, with a scar that ran from his ear to the corner of his mouth, and the sight of the 2 of them walking my yard like they owned it turned my legs to water. Then Denise's white car came flying up the gravel, and she got out furious in heels again, in a dress I had never seen, and she did not so much as greet her brother, she just called toward my dark windows. "Mama, stop this. Stop acting like a child and come out and talk to us." I stood behind that tree and watched the four of them move around my house, my son checking the bushes, my daughter peering in my windows, the two strangers circling and sizing up the doors. I heard the scarred man ask if I could be inside, and I heard Denise tell him no. She changed the locks, we don't have keys. And I heard the tattooed one say it did not matter, he could open any door in 5 minutes. And I heard Curtis say no, we can't break in, that's a crime. And I heard the scarred man answer that they did not have all day. And then, thank God, I heard sirens. The men heard them too, and they did not wait around to explain themselves to anyone. They ran for the sedan and threw up a rooster tail of gravel getting off my land just as the patrol car turned the corner, leaving Curtis and Denise standing in my yard, trying to arrange their faces into innocence. 2 officers got out, one young and one gray at the temples, with the look of a man who had seen every kind of family come apart. And I stepped out from behind my tree because I would not let my children lie to the law on my own property, and because I understood at last that the safest place for me was standing in the daylight next to 2 police officers. "Officers," I called, walking toward them. "I'm the one who called. I'm Angela Whitcomb. I own this house. And these are my children, but they came here with 2 men who ran off when they heard you coming, and I hid because I am afraid of them." "Mama, that's a lie," Denise cried. "We came to visit you." The gray-haired officer looked between us, and he asked in the even voice of a man who wants the truth about the men in the gray car. Curtis said flatly that there were no men, that he did not know what anyone was talking about. And I told the officers what I could prove, that I had it on camera, that my cousin had heard the plan at Hank's Tavern, that I had made a report already with the county, and I watched the color drain out of my son's face as he understood that I was not the confused, defenseless old woman his whole plan required me to be. That was when Curtis lost the last of himself. All the frustration and the debt and the drink and the fury of a man whose scheme is collapsing in front of him came up out of him at once, and he came at me with his fists clenched, shouting that I was going to give them that money right now, and when the young officer stepped between us, Curtis threw him aside like a man swatting a branch and lunged the rest of the way. He hit me with the full weight of his shoulder, and I went down backward onto the flagstones I had laid myself years ago. And I put my hand out to catch myself the way you do, and I felt my wrist give with a sound I heard more than felt, and then the flagstone came up into my side, and something deep in my chest cracked, and a pain like a hot iron drove all the breath out of me. I heard myself cry out from very far away. I heard Denise scream her brother's name high and horrified, as if she were only now too late seeing what she had helped build. I heard the officers wrestling Curtis to the ground, and his voice thick and ugly, still yelling that I was a crazy old woman stealing their money, even as the handcuffs went on. And I lay on my own cold flagstones, with my wrist bent wrong beneath me and my ribs on fire, and I looked up at the April sky, and through all the pain I felt one clear and terrible thing, which was not fear, and was not even anger. It was grief. Because the boy I had rocked in this very yard was being folded into the back of a police car for breaking his mother's bones, and no fortune on earth, kept or given, could ever put that right. The ambulance came in under 10 minutes, and the paramedic who knelt over me on my own flagstones had gentle hands and a calm voice, and he told me what I already knew from a lifetime of tending broken bodies. My wrist was fractured, and at least 1 rib on my left side was cracked, maybe 2. They lifted me onto the stretcher, and as they carried me past the patrol car, I saw my son through the window, and for one moment our eyes met. The fury had gone out of his face. What was left was the look of a boy who has done a thing he cannot take back, and is only now understanding it. "Mama," he called through the glass, "I didn't mean for this. I just wanted." But whatever he wanted, I did not hear the end of it, and I was not sure it would have mattered. At the hospital, they set my wrist and put it in a cast, and they told me the ribs would have to heal on their own, that there was nothing to be done for a cracked rib but time and care, and the kind of pain that reminds you. It is there every time you breathe or laugh or turn over in bed. The doctor was young and kind and told me the wrist would be in the cast about 6 weeks, and the ribs would take 6 to 8 weeks to knit, and that for a while I would not be lifting anything or doing anything that pulled at my side. No sewing for a good while, he said, when I told him my trade, and that was its own small grief, my hands stilled on top of everything else. Lorraine came flying into the emergency room out of breath from running, and she sat with me the whole night, and when I told her my son had done this, she took my good hand in both of hers and did not say a word because there was nothing to say that would help. And Lorraine has always known the difference between comfort and noise. That first night in the hospital I did not sleep, and it was not the pain that kept me awake, though the pain was considerable. It was the arithmetic of my own life laid out on the ceiling above the bed. I had raised 2 children. I had rocked them both in the same yard where one of them had just put me on the ground. I had gone without so they would not have to in the years when Raymond and I had almost nothing, and I had never once let them see me cry over a bill. And somewhere in the long middle of their lives, between the fireflies in a jar and the handcuffs in my driveway, the children I had loved had become people I did not recognize and could not trust. I lay there and grieved them as if they had died, because in a way the children I remembered had, and the grown strangers who had taken their place were capable of things those children could never have imagined. A mother is not supposed to outlive her children. No one tells you that she can lose them without a funeral, that they can be standing right in front of her and be gone all the same. Toward morning, a nurse came in to check on me, a woman about my own age with tired, kind eyes, and she saw I was awake, and she did not ask me any bright, cheerful questions. She just adjusted my pillow and sat with me a minute in the dark. I have sat in that chair 1,000 times myself on the other side, watching over someone else's worst night. It is a strange thing to be the one in the bed. It taught me something I had somehow gone 66 years without learning, which is that letting someone care for you is not weakness, and that I had spent my whole life so determined to need no one that I had made myself very easy to abandon. I decided lying there that I was done with that. Not done being strong, done being alone on purpose. The gray-haired officer came by before I was discharged to take my statement, and I gave him all of it, from the sale of the land in March, to the demands to Todd's threat at the Bluebird, to the men at Hank's, to the break-in on my camera, to the scheme to have me declared out of my mind. He wrote it all down, and when I finished, he looked at me for a long moment and told me that what my son had done had a name in the law, elder abuse, and that it was a felony, and he asked whether I wanted to press charges. I will not pretend that was an easy question. It is one thing to be furious with your child, and another entirely to put your name on the paper that sends him to prison. But I thought about the flagstones and the men in the gray car and the piece of paper Todd had wanted that would have erased not just my money, but my very right to decide anything for myself, and I understood I had no honest choice. Yes, I told him, I want to press charges. Not only for the wrist and the ribs, but for all of it, the threats, the men, the whole cold machine they built to take an old woman apart. I want to be truthful about the weeks that followed, because the way these things resolve in real life is slower and messier than anyone wants it to be. Nothing was settled in a day. Curtis was arrested and charged, but there were arraignments and postponements and lawyers and dates that got moved, and it stretched across the whole late spring and into summer. I stayed at Lorraine's while my ribs healed because I could not face my own house yet, and every week seemed to bring some new piece of the story into the light. The 2 men from the gray sedan were picked up within the month, and it turned out both had records, fraud and extortion, and one of them, to save his own skin, told the investigators plainly that Todd Farrow had hired their employer's help to lean on me, and that the debt behind all of it was Todd's. That confession cracked the case wide open, and what had started as one man's assault on his mother became an investigation into a conspiracy. It was in the middle of all that, while I was propped on Lorraine's couch with a pillow against my ribs, that my daughter turned. Denise came to the door one evening looking like a different woman than the one in heels who had peered through my windows. She had lost weight, and there were dark hollows under her eyes, and she wore old plain clothes, and she stood on Lorraine's porch and asked if she could come in. Lorraine looked at me ready to send her away, but I nodded because I wanted to hear it. "Mama," Denise said, and she could barely get the words out. "I found out what he was really doing, Todd. I thought, God help me. I thought we were just going to convince you. I told myself it was a loan that you owed us, that it wasn't so wrong. But that's not what it was." She was shaking. "The guardianship. The doctor. That was never about protecting anybody. It was about him getting control of your money to pay off what he owes, and when it started falling apart, I found out what the plan was if it all went bad. He was going to put it on me. The papers, Mama. The petition, the forms, the things I signed. My name is on all of it, not his. He set it up so that if anyone went to prison for trying to take your money, it was going to be me, and he was going to walk away clean and keep the children while I did it." I sat with that a while. It was, I thought, the truest thing about Todd Farrow I had ever heard, that he had built the whole scheme so that his own wife would take the fall for it, and that my daughter had not seen it until it was aimed at her own heart. Betrayal inside the betrayal. "So now you come to me," I said. "Now I know what he is," she said. "And I would rather lose everything than let him use me against you and then take my children too. I'm going to the investigators, Mama. I'm going to tell them all of it, everything I know about Todd and about those men. I don't care what it costs me. I can't be the person he was turning me into." Before she left that night, she stood in Lorraine's doorway with her coat half on, and she said one more thing, the thing I think she had come to say and had been afraid to. "Mama, I keep going back over that afternoon at your house, the Thursday, and I remember you asking me when was the last time I called just to see how you were. And I couldn't answer you because there wasn't a last time. There was never a time. I made you into a bank in my head so I wouldn't have to feel bad about never calling, because a bank doesn't have feelings you have to worry about and a mother does. I turned you into a thing so I could keep taking from you. I don't know how a person forgives that. I'm not asking you to. I just needed to say I finally see it." I did not embrace her that night. I was not ready, and she did not ask me to be. But I will admit that when she said that something in my chest that had been clenched tight since March loosened by a fraction, not into forgiveness, but into the possibility that forgiveness might one day have somewhere to land. She had told me the truest thing anyone in my family had said in a year, and she had gained nothing by saying it, and that more than any tears was how I knew my real daughter was somewhere still alive inside the stranger. She told me the truth, and went home to her children, and that for the moment was enough. The resolutions came over the rest of that year, one at a time, in the slow grinding way of courts. Curtis faced with the camera footage, and the officer's own eyes pleaded guilty. He was sentenced in the summer to 2 years with the possibility of parole after 1 if he completed a treatment program for his drinking and his gambling, because the judge, to his credit, could see that a sick man and a cruel man are not always the same man, even when they share a body. The 2 men from the sedan received longer terms because of their records, and the man behind the debt, the one who had sent them, drew the heaviest sentence of all when the whole conspiracy was laid out. Todd Farrow was charged, and his debt came due with no fortune to pay it, and the dangerous man he owed had no more patience for him, and Todd learned, I imagine, that there are worse fates than being told no by your mother-in-law. Denise, because she had come forward and cooperated and testified, was not sent to prison. She was given probation and ordered into therapy, which she had already begun on her own, and made to perform a year of community service, which the judge, in a stroke of something like wisdom, directed her to serve at a care facility for the elderly. And I filed for and received an order of protection, so that whatever came next, the law stood between me and the men who had done this. Through all of it, Todd never once came to face me himself. It was Denise who did the coming again and again, in the quiet way of a person trying to earn back something she knows she may never fully earn. Now I will tell you the thing I have been keeping from everyone, the secret at the center of all of it, the truth that was already true on the day my daughter first heard I had money. One evening late in the summer, when my ribs had finally stopped stabbing me, and I was sitting in Lorraine's garden with a glass of iced tea, she asked me the question no one else had thought to ask in all these months. Not how much did you get, not what will you do with it, but simply with real tenderness. "Angela, what did you want that money for? Because I have known you 20 years, and I know you weren't hoarding it out of meanness. What was it really for?" And so I told her about Vivian Cross, about the seamstress 2 blocks from the group home who took in a scared 18-year-old with a duffel bag and $41 and no place to sleep, and gave her a broom and then a needle, and then a trade, and then a life. About the promise I made at Vivian's grave almost 40 years ago, that if I ever had the means, I would do for some other lost child what she had done for me. And I told Lorraine what the money had become before anyone ever came asking for it. In Paul Brenner's office that first week of April, I had established a charitable trust, one that can never be undone or reversed or reached, and I had named it the Vivian Cross Foundation. Its purpose is to help young people who are aging out of foster care the way I once did children who turn 18 and are handed their belongings and shown the door with nothing and no one. The foundation gives them what Vivian gave me, training in a trade help, finding a first place to live, a hand across the gap where a family should be. And with a separate smaller portion, I had opened protected education savings accounts for Bella and for Sam, so that whatever became of their parents, my grandchildren's schooling was safe and could not be touched. Lorraine had tears running down her face by the time I finished. "Angela," she said, "your children tried to steal money that was already going to save children like the child you used to be." And the accounts they were circling there was never anything in them worth stealing, because you'd already taken care of everybody, even them. Even the grandbabies they were using as a bargaining chip. That is the part that breaks my heart the most, I said. If Denise had ever come to me kindly, if she had ever once asked about my life instead of my bank account, she would have found out that her own children were already provided for. Todd held Bella and Sam up like cards to play against me, and they were safe all along, safer than that man could have made them in a lifetime. The greed almost destroyed the very thing it pretended to be fighting for. I went ahead with all of it, more determined than ever, because if these months had taught me anything, it was the difference between people who need help and people who simply want what is yours. The Vivian Cross Foundation held its opening that November, about 8 months after I sold the land in the community room of the library downtown. And Lorraine was beside me, and so were neighbors who had known me for years, and Wayne Ackerley stood at the back, turning his cap in his hands, and looking prouder than I had any right to make him. Denise came too. She stayed near the door and did not approach me during the ceremony, and only afterward, when the room had mostly cleared, did she come near. "Mama," she said, "I just wanted to say I'm proud of what you're doing. It's a good thing, a really good thing." And then quietly, "Do you think we could ever have a normal relationship again?" I looked at my daughter for a long moment before I answered, because she deserved the truth and not a comfort. "I don't think we can have the relationship we had before, Denise. That one was built on a trust that got broken, and you cannot unbreak a thing like that by wishing. But maybe with a great deal of time and a great deal of proof we can build something new, something honest. That is the most I can promise you, and it is more than I could have promised you 6 months ago. That's more than I have any right to ask for," she said, and she was crying, and this time I did not think she was performing because there was nothing left to get from me, and she wept anyway. The first young person the foundation helped was a girl named Keisha Monroe, 18 years old, who had aged out that spring with a garbage bag of clothes and nowhere to go, exactly as I once had. We placed her with a program and got her into a course to learn a trade and helped her find a room, and the first time I met her, she stood in my doorway pretending she was not frightened, and I knew that face. I have worn that face. And I thought, there you are. Vivian still doing your work all these years later through a pair of hands you never lived to see. Keisha comes by on Sundays now. I am teaching her to sew a little when my wrist allows it. She is quick and proud and terrified and brave, and she is going to be all right, and I did not do that alone. Vivian started it 40 years ago. I only kept the promise. A few weeks after the opening, a letter came from Curtis, the first word from him since the day he broke my bones. He wrote that he thinks about what he did to me every single day and hates himself for it every single day, and that in the program, he is finally beginning to understand how sick he had let himself become. He wrote that he was not asking me to forgive him because he knew forgiveness like that takes a long time, if it ever comes at all, and that he only wanted me to know he was sorry, and that when he got out, he meant to spend the rest of his life trying to be a man his mother would not be ashamed of. I read it twice, and when I set it down, I noticed that for the first time since that Thursday in March, I did not feel anger toward my children. I had not forgiven them, not fully, and perhaps I never entirely will. But I had found something near enough to peace to live inside. It is a year now since I sold the land. My wrist healed and my ribs healed, and I am back at my table in the morning light with a hem across my knees and Biscuit's chin on my foot. I turned 67 last month. The Vivian Cross Foundation has helped its first handful of young people find their footing, and there will be more. Denise finished her therapy sessions and continues them by choice, and she is raising Bella and Sam alone now on a small income and a lot of humility, and she is, I will say it, becoming a better mother than she was a daughter that spring. Curtis will be up for parole soon, and I do not know yet whether we will find our way back to each other, but I know he is working, and working is a start. My grandchildren still come to me, and their schooling is safe, and they will never know, if I can help it, how close their own father came to taking it from them. And I have learned the thing I was too busy surviving to learn in all my 66 years before this one. Money is not the most important thing a person has. Self-respect is. I learned that it is not selfish to say no even to your own children, especially to your own children, when yes would cost you the person you are. I learned that protecting what is yours does not make you hard. It makes you whole. And I learned lying on my own cold flagstones with my son being folded into a police car, that the most painful things that ever happen to us can be the very things that show us at last exactly who we are and what we were always strong enough to do. They thought they had cornered a lonely widow sitting on a pile of cash. What they never understood is that the cash was never sitting there at all, that I had moved it beyond their reach, before the first of them ever came up my walk, that a woman who has raised herself from nothing knows how to protect what matters long before anyone thinks to threaten it. They came to take everything from a helpless old woman. They found out too late that I was never helpless, and that everything they wanted was already spoken for, already spent on saving children like the child I used to be. My name is Angela Whitcomb. I am 67 years old, and after a lifetime of valuing everyone above myself, I have finally learned to be worth as much to me as I was always worth to everyone else.